knowing.
All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio. This is episode 239. Jason and I have asked Mr. Tom Barnett back from Australia. So it's later than Jason and I usually record here in the United States on the Eastern Seaboard, and very early or relatively early in the day for Tom. Anyhow, welcome, Jason.
Good evening, Crow.
So we had some craziness today, but that will be behind us by the time this airs. We'll do a live stream to cover what happened with episode 233, which I have removed, but I'm walking away from that, and that's probably the last thing you're going to ever hear me say about it. Today, we're excited to have Tom back. We just did an episode, which will be the previous Thursday from the Thursday you were listening to this, that had to do with law. And it spins your head, even just the simple knowledge of understanding the difference between the realms that we exist in when we live as human beings in this world, private or public. The fact that only one of those is about living men and women. It's crazy where we've come to, but this is exactly why we've asked Tom back, because we want to begin to address human consciousness and things like this as it relates to the condition we find ourselves in. So anything you want to get in, Jason, before we get Tom in?
Well, Tom was a fantastic person to have on last time, but I think this one might be about a lot more positive things and not just about how crazy the insanity of the law and the convoluted mess that they've got us trapped in. But yeah, I think this will be a lot more positive for everyone.
Indeed. So let's go ahead and jump in. Welcome, Tom. Welcome back. Quick turnaround.
Yeah, quick turnaround. Yeah, I'm glad to be back, though. Thanks for having me.
Hey, if it works, it works. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. So let's jump in here. It's been my contention. I've made quite a few things very plain and clear that I accept are correct at this point in time. One of those things is that we're coming to the end of a cycle, which will be at the low point of the sun on December 12/21, December 21st, 2020, which will be the winter solstice, which is one of the biggest days of the sky clock year. It's why we put our biggest holiday there, by the way, Christmas. It's not to do with the things you've been told, unless hyper-materialism is what you're celebrating. But the other thing is the Grand Conjunction, which is generational, once in a generation. In a lifetime, people might see 3, if you're lucky 4, roughly every, 20 years. We got 9/11 on the back of the last one. But this one isn't falling on just any old day. It's falling on the solstice itself. But to back up a little bit, it's also been my contention that we really began to notice a rise in human consciousness sometime around the millennium. People pick all kinds of dates. So roughly in the neighborhood of the year 2000. What's happened, we've entered a world that's done just about everything it can to crush that rising consciousness. So what do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I agree. I think when we're talking about the rising of consciousness or a new age of anything, I think we kind of got into it a little bit at the end of the last interview. But I've always seen in my experience that it has always been offered as a potential and not necessarily just a given. So while that is certainly an energetic potential that we're moving into, as you mentioned, the powers that be are doing their darndest to make sure that human potential doesn't, I guess, rise to where it can be. So I think we're being offered a gift and the potential to become more than we are now, to step into a new reality and to become, more fully realized as individuals and as a race, I guess, as well. But we're going to have obstacles in the way, and it does take inner work to be able to meet and to reach and attain that potential that we're being offered.
In a weird way, it's almost like we're mirroring the Adjustment Bureau, I think is the name of the movie. It's an old Philip K. Dick novel it was drafted from. But it's outlining the ideas that we're going to cover to some degree, and we may get into law again here, where in the movie, the people are basically controlled. They're adjusted, they're told what to do, they're steered in the directions that are required until they begin to act like adults that are responsible for themselves, and they demand the ability to make their own decisions. And I don't know what you think, but it kind of mirrors what we see now. You're told to do these things that are not legal orders. Mostly it's suggestions that are given very forcefully, and people change their whole way of being. And this is a prime example. As a race, are we adults? Do we determine our own destiny, or do we need someone to tell us what to do? I don't know if you've seen that movie, but what do you think? There's quite a corollary there.
Yeah, huge. I haven't seen the movie, but I'm familiar with the story. And, it is very, well, at least in certain circles, it's very well known that everything, every structure in the world, every what we consider maybe evil thought process or what have you, has always been offered to us in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through song, cartoons, movies, books, whatever. These are written a lot of the times by people in the secret societies, and they put them out because it's their form of offering us it's like nobody can turn around and then say, hey, you didn't tell us. You didn't tell us that you had this agenda. They've told us in many ways all of the time, every single day. They hide all of their signs in plain sight, as people say. And it's really, from their point of view, they're not lying to us and they're not hiding anything. They are actually showing and telling us. It's just whether or not we're docile enough to actually just not notice, or if we are able to, through our own, our own growth and our own ability to start seeing things, then we start to notice this and we say, hey, that movie that they made, they were actually telling us exactly what's going on. Adjustment Bureau, Matrix, pretty much every movie, to be honest. There's so many that actually tell us little bits of the puzzle, little bits of and pieces of what goes on and what they intend to go on if we do not wake up to it and say, okay, well, that's what's going on. That's what they're telling us they are going to do in the future as well. And then we, as you said, take our own responsibility and we stop walking into the story that they have created and we start creating our own story. But only an adult can make their own story. That's kind of the definition. Like, most people in society are children around 12 years of age, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and under, like 12 years old and under, walking around in adult bodies. And that's why we see a lot of the behaviors that we see in the world, the way people treat each other, the way we fail in a lot of ways to reach enough common ground to keep creating something that is more beneficial and greater for everybody. We keep seeing, in too many situations, we keep seeing that we work against one another and that we end up devolving into childish nature. So that definition of being adult is simply to take responsibility for what we create moment to moment. And that's always a potential for anybody, but it does take, you have to do certain steps to be able to get there.
Well, it's a perfect idea. Let me finish this, Jason. I'll throw it over to you because you used the date of 12. Jason and I just covered this. People are bar mitzvahed, or quinceañeras typically happen when you reach that magical teen. You're a teen, you're something different. And the 12 standing in for the 12 stations of the sun. You've been around so that the 12 has done, or the sun has done its 12 stations. But I'll proffer a quick example before I kick it over to Jason here. If you had never seen a single movie or TV show in your life and you hadn't served in the military during wartime or something like that, how much violence would you have ever seen in your life? Would you have ever seen anyone shot and killed? Would you have ever seen anyone beaten to death? And this is a prime example of what we're getting at, because in many ways, even our idea of anger and violence and all these other things has literally been given us through entertainment. And I think it's important to consider where our ideas come from. For my part, a long time ago, I decided not to get mad anymore. But it's one thing to say you're going to do that. It's a whole other thing to do it, because when you sit down to do it, you have to recognize what is making me upset. Why am I getting mad? And then it comes down to, whose thoughts were those in the first place? Were those even my thoughts and my ideas that were making me angry? And it's a crazy thing when you start to get into it. But anyhow, Jason, go ahead.
So we definitely have heard a lot when you start looking into this kind of information about this karmic thing that the controllers, the elites, whatever you want to call them, seem to play by. They seem to play by their karmic rules, whatever you want to call it. What do you know about that, Tom, and what do you think about all that?
Well, my understanding is really only basic in that regard, and that is that if they have given us the opportunity to voice non-consent or to not go along with what they are offering. As we spoke about in the legal episode last time, we talked about everything that's given to us from the public, in the public realm, is essentially only an offer. It's a contractual offer. So if they have given us the disclosure of what's going on, then they're not hiding and deceiving. And then under God's law, then there's not the same karmic ramifications. It's like if I said to you, hey, I'm actually going to come around to your house at 6 p.m. today, and I'm just going to steal your bike because I feel like having a bike. And you then know that I'm coming. You can say, hey, look, I don't want you to do that. And if you do that, I'll press charges, or, I'll throw a rock at you, or I'll hide my bike so it's not actually going to be there. You have the opportunity then to act or to react or to not act at all. And then if I come and take your bike, on some level, to me, it's still wrong, but on some level, it has less of there's less karmic blowback, because it's almost like you have then said, it's okay to come and take my bike. If you don't hide it, if you don't tell me not to come and take it, it's almost as if you have then said, you can have my bike. I still don't think it's right that I go and take it, but from their point of view, and this is only my understanding, but I think from their point of view, they then think that under God's law, which they cannot escape, then they've got a bit more of a free pass. That's my understanding anyway.
Some of that stuff doesn't pass muster, and it's a mystery to me whether they're just drinking their own Kool-Aid. A good Jewish friend of mine in San Diego, who was raised in the Hebrew tradition and bar mitzvahed, spoke the language, could read the language. He explained this to me, and I guess this is out of the Talmud. One of these karmic ideas is this. So a Jewish man's hauled in front of the Jewish court, and they say, did you kill that non-Jewish man? And he says, well, hell no, I didn't kill him. I just tied him up. He starved to death. The idea there being that somehow the tying up was not the death. And I don't give a darn who or what you think you are. That doesn't pass muster. The logic of it is the death would not have occurred had the tying up of the individual not occurred. So how you somehow extract yourself from the karmic debt is beyond me. But I think we both know, Tom, all this pre-echoing in movies is just exactly what you've laid out. Are you so damn sleepy that you're going to call that coincidence or conspiracy, or are you going to open your eyes and realize it's not just this movie, it's every damn movie? And at some point, you've got to realize, why is this being done? And I'm with you all day long. I think it's an effort to alleviate what I call universal law, and that is that you cannot forcefully infringe on the free will of another. And I'll tell you another thing, it's almost to the point with all I've learned about law, that when a child gets old enough to talk, some adult ought to come in and sit down and say, okay, listen carefully. The offers will follow shortly, you know, because no one ever gets that. And we never understand that the offer is being made until, what am I? I'm in my 50s. How old was I by the time I understood these were all offers? Probably in my late 40s by the time I finally understood that these are offers. Like when I used to get my insurance stuff, I didn't think that was an offer. I thought it had to be done. Well, if I don't do this, I lose my license. But it's gotten so blatantly obvious that now when I get my insurance stuff, at the very top of the page, it said, here's the offer. And I just sit there and I sit there in my kitchen cracking up saying, look at this, honey, here's the offer. But anyhow, I'm with you.
Yeah, you just nailed it. It's imagine if, and this is the thing, there is the potential. There has always been the potential for us to have learned this when we were young. And this is, I think, one of the areas where people get a little disheartened. And this relates really heavily to what we're talking about today, because people tend to wake up when they're maybe 30, 40 kind of age, where they start to realize that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes for the last few decades. And then they always say, the first thing, what they say, I wish I knew this when I was 18 or 12 or whatever. That's what everybody says. I wish I knew that these foods did this and they were poisoning my brain. I wish that I knew that this was how the law works, that I could stand up for my rights. I wish I knew that I didn't have to have all this debt or had to have gone through these schooling systems or what have you. Everybody always says, I wish if I could go back, and etc. So the point of that is, that's true to some degree, but also that frustration and either anger or despair or whatever emotion comes up, that also is an opportunity to, I guess, foster more self-growth, because none of those emotions actually help you to become more than what you are. And I think we're always given what we're given at the right time. So if it wasn't our time to have woken up, say, when we were 15 or 16 or younger, then it just wasn't the right time. It's like, as a practitioner, I'm always careful of what I give to each person, because if you give somebody something that they're not capable of either understanding or taking in or assimilating or even hearing, if you give that to them at the wrong time, you're actually doing them a disservice. So if you have access to more information than others have, you kind of have to be very discerning and gauge who you're talking to, because if you tell them something that they form a mental block over immediately because they were just incapable of taking that in, then when the time comes that they could take that in, they're actually going to be further behind because they already have an energetic block to that being a reality. So you may actually be delaying somebody's growth and their time that they'll actually start waking up if you give them something too early, which is why, when I was treating people a lot, I had to be very careful in that regard about what I told them about themselves or about the world or about, pretty much anything. So it is always, as I said, it's that opportunity and it's the potential that we're dealing with. And I think it's exciting when people do come, even if they're 60 years old and they start to realize what's going on, that's still a really good opportunity, because also if you're starting to get down these lines of thought, you realize that time is not this linear construct that we're also dealt out in our formal education. So then that's something else that can be used to get a greater understanding of the self and the world around us.
I've said it so many times. You have to be careful proffering information. I have people come and yell at me publicly in forums. Crow, why don't you just tell the truth, and why don't you just say it like it is? And, I thought about this for a long time. I knew why I was doing it. And finally, I realized the response. What good does it do to teach someone advanced algebra that can't even add and subtract yet? What it does is it sets them back further, which is exactly what you're saying. But you looking to get in on this at all, Jason, or should I just bogart this joint, my friend?
Keep going.
One of the big things that's really occurred is a lot of older people, like you're saying, in their 60s are catching on. And I've said, it's my contention, too, that if people lived to be 150 years old, a lot of this nonsense would be gone. The idea of war, so many things would be gone. It's almost like our lifespan has been geared to allow what's happened around us. Look at all the biblical counts. How did they know way back in the day to top a human life at 120 years or whatever it says? Because that's pretty much the line that you don't see crossed. I suppose it has been here and there, but for the most part, that really is the line. How did they know it? So there's something to all these things. But what I find is when the older folks really start to cue in, it's substantially more dramatic, the effects that happen. And I think part of it is just a mature a person putting that into the mind stream. It's almost like the 100th monkey idea. But then again, I see so many younger people. We see people in their 20s coming along that are realizing all this. And then that's powerful in a whole different way. Because where will that generation be when I'm dead and gone and they're sitting where I am now, having picked it up, early in their 20s? But where do you want to go from here, Tom? Where do you want to steer the conversation?
Well, I think you hit on a good point, which is that most of what we experience in the world is simply a construct of the mind. So war itself is a construct of the mind. And if people did not engage in that particular way of thinking, then wars wouldn't actually happen. So you might think, oh, well, you can't avoid it, but it's not. I use this example all the time. People say there's an earthquake in wherever. Let's say it's in the States somewhere. Let's say it's in a third world country, right? And they say, well, it's going to cost $50 million to do that. But it doesn't cost $50 million to do anything, because that's assuming you just drop a pile of $100 bills there, $50 million worth, and then the money does the work. But the money doesn't do anything. It's always people that do the work. So when you say that, or when like war is engineered and offered and everything else, it's people that get involved. If people didn't get involved because the construct of the mind was different, then what we see in the world would be completely different. Like you just said, we could live in a world without wars, without hunger. We could live in a world where we don't contest each other all the time, and we don't fight each other, and that we don't consume so much. We just have a completely different way of thinking that is not so predatory and is much more harmonious. And that is simply a construct of the mind. We can choose one way or another, but it's where the majority of people are. And the majority of people at the moment are in that asleep matrix world that is programmed, and they're living out that programming. And then the people that are waking up are the ones that have come into the realization that that is a program. We can choose a different way. We can pretty much choose anything we want, but that comes down to the adulthood principle, which is standing on one's own 2 feet, making our own decisions, and knowing that there are thoughts, actions, and then consequences, and that we take responsibility for those. We take responsibility for our thoughts. We realize that we are creating those. We realize that we are responsible for our actions, and we are also responsible for the consequences of any of our actions. And as long as we're not blaming others, and we're not trying to pass the buck to others, oh, well, that's not my fault because the government did this, or this person did that, or my husband or my wife did this. We're not laying blame all the time, and we are taking it on ourselves. And one last thing I'll say before we move to another topic is that I have seen, because I've spent a lot of time educating younger people as well, and when I was growing up, and even now, like, I'm younger than a lot of the people that I counsel, for example, and I have seen in the eyes of 9-year-olds today, I see that I see who and what they are, and they're far more advanced than I am. A lot of people think that I'm more advanced than them, that are older than me, and so on and so forth. And I just think that nature always has this way of self-regulating. And when you look at the principles of, say, star seeds, or however you want to look at that, nature is always going to put in something to balance out the world. And I see so much advancement there in some of the young people today. But again, that is only the potential, because they have that potential. They're extremely bright and intelligent, and there's something in them that is extraordinary. But they're going into a world with smartphones, iPads, Wi-Fi everywhere, 5G. They're going to be on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. They're going to be surrounded by people who aren't as aware as them. They're going to be injected with things if their parents are allowing that. And so everything that they have in them is simply a potential, and it's really only up to them if they realize that potential. But it's also a little bit up to us to see that is there, and to help, not tell them what to do, but to offer, just to offer. Same thing as what the elite do to us, we can only offer to others. It's never our responsibility to go, you should do this, this is the best course of life for you. It's just that offer. And more than anything, it's leading by example. So when you say that, you mentioned before about it's great that 20-year-olds and starting to learn this stuff that you didn't learn until you were 40-something. And anything that's theory is interesting, but what really affects change is inspiration. So they want to see us acting as men and women. They want to see us as the example of being self-responsible and taking control of our own lives. And they want to see in us that we are fearless and that we are content and happy. We're not walking around with anger. We're not walking around saying, I know how the law works, for example, but you've got this massive chip on your shoulder and you're angry the whole time. You're not, that doesn't inspire people. That's like, well, that guy's not really, kids are smart. They know, even if they can't explain it, they feel it on a deep level. They go, well, I'm hearing this from John or Mark or Susie, but I'm seeing something that is not quite congruent. So therefore, am I going to take on what they're saying? It just sounds like a whole bunch of words to me. Or do they look at us as adults and just think, wow, there is something resonant about that person that I can feel, and that inspires me. And now what they're saying, what's coming out of their mouth is going to land with me a lot more because I want to be like that. I can see that they are completely congruent. They have integrity, and they are a fearless being that is walking the path of God, say, as opposed to, walking that path of just a lot of words and trying to tell me what to do, but not really doing what they're saying and all that kind of thing. So again, it's always potential. We have the potential to inspire, and these younger ones coming through definitely have the potential. You mentioned at the start that we're coming into a new age. I think everything that as new generations are born, they are born with this probably a higher energy, but it has to be realized. It has to be, it has to be taken and not just taken as a given.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think the hypo's about? But go ahead, Jason.
One of the things I would suggest that this whole modern situation is about is because too many people were kind of, sort of, starting to get with the program, or more to the point, buck the program and starting to figure it out. And this is an easy way to blanket everything all over the world and get people to get back in line.
Well, I'll add something based on what both of you just said. In my lifetime, the big epiphany moments have been, and I realized this as before I started doing the podcast, but it's guided me the whole time I've done this. For some reason, I'd been told this thing before, but it didn't hit me. It didn't resonate. I didn't take it on board. And then I heard it again. I might even heard it 5 times, but then finally I hear it, and it's said in a way that hit home so hard, everything changes. One of those times I can remember is I was a Marine during the first Gulf War, and I was in my 20s when I finally recognized why they call it the theater of war. I remember the day it happened. Schwarzkopf, I think, said it. And from that day forward, I had never forgot it. I don't know why being told in that way, but if someone would have told me when I was in my 20s, words have meaning. And if you understand the meaning, it's a clue to what you can't see in front of your face, whether it would have helped me or not. And then think about what Tom just said. Sometimes it just, when you're not ready, it doesn't matter what you're told. But what do you think about that? The idea, offering to people the idea that words have meaning. I swear when we do all these podcasts, half the time I'm sitting there thinking about what are the words to be used here to try to deliver this in the most helpful way where the most people can at least consider it. But what if someone went down that avenue to try to help people to catch on to what's going on around us? Simply words have meaning. And you use 1,000 of them a day, and I'm guessing you only know accurately what about 10% of them mean. Do you think that's a helpful avenue?
Yeah, absolutely. I would think most people wouldn't even know what 10% of the words mean that they're using.
Right.
But there's a book that's come out. I don't know if it's fairly recently, but a few people have mentioned it to me. It's called Word Magic, and I think the guy's name is Pao Chang, Pao Chang, and that's all about the meanings behind words and the way that words can sound phonetically similar but have vastly different meanings, and also where the origins of the word come from. So I played with this idea when I was about 17, I think, and I remember it because people were telling me that, oh, this means this and that means that, and you have to use the right words, otherwise you're communicating something completely different. And at that time I thought, well, but what if the intention behind the word is what's important and not the word itself? Because the question was, does a word carry inherent meaning? And what first drew me to this was I was quite rebellious when I was younger, and I was in a yoga class that I got dragged to, and I'm not much of a singer. It was one of those Kundalini yoga classes, and I don't really like to sing in a group, not because I don't like to sing, but because I know that my voice just doesn't resonate with everybody else's, and it's a bit off-putting. And so they wanted you to chant all these words, and they said, you're saying Ra, because when you say Ra, it means the sun, and it brings in the sun, and it brings in, or it was Ra or something else. And I just, in the moment, I just thought, but does it? Because if you made a certain sound frequency, which is what a word is, then wouldn't I inherently just look up to the sun or look to the heavens or look to wherever? Because that word that sound is resonating with the universe itself. But it really seems as though we learn the meaning of words, and therefore that again is a construct of the mind. So if I were to say to you, what's a good example? If I were just to say to you that, I use words like person, or I use words like, consideration, or anything to do with, satisfaction, anything that can be used against you legally, for example. If the intention behind the word is pure and you know what I mean, I think, and I'm only really posing a question, I'm not making a statement here, but I think that the intention, I wonder if the intention is more important than the word itself. Having said that, I do think that it is hugely important to get to know the meaning of words, because otherwise you don't know when somebody is pulling the wool over your eyes with the words that they're using. You may not be able to separate the intention from the word itself. So I do think 100% that it should be something that we all learn. And I also wondered at that time when I was younger, it just put me into a question spiral. And I was thinking, do words have inherent meaning? And have we just not been taught that? Do the sounds carry inherent meaning? And then I thought, well, what about the shape of letters? Like, is there a metaphysical basis for the shape of every letter? So why is there a curve in an A and or a straight line in an L or whatever? Like, do they carry inherent meaning? And then I was thinking, well, there's so many different languages, and everybody does things differently. So is there some commonality between all of the written languages? Is there some metaphysical origin for all of the different shapes that make up the different letters of each alphabet around the world? And, I never got to all of those answers, but I went through that questioning process that kind of got me to the understanding that, and it's only my understanding, but if we innately understand ourselves, then the words that come out of us carry more meaning. And if we innately understand ourselves, then we can discern what is being offered to us in the form of words from others. And I kind of came to the conclusion not long after that, that if we were to evolve to our next stage of being, we would dispel with this linear format of language. Because right now I'm speaking to you, and I started a couple of minutes ago on this monologue that I'm doing, and you're decoding it one kind of fragment at a time because it's coming out in a linear fashion. However, if I could emit a tone similar to what, say, a bird does, I could emit a singular tone, and within that tone could be coded all of the information that I'm trying to say. So it'd be like a zip file on the computer where you just put it all into this one thing, and you emit a single tone, and depending on the frequency of that tone, it could be encoded with an encyclopedia of information that you would assimilate in an instant. It wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to unpack it and go through it all, and it would take hours and hours. It would be an instantaneous reception and assimilation of information based on the encoded frequency of that particular tone, as opposed to all of these words that I'm just speaking now.
Well, I think I'm with you 100%. I did similar things with the idea of intent, and to me, it's the apex concern. But this is the trap, isn't it? Because we live in a system that doesn't give a damn about intent, because procedure crushes intent. But we both know, based on a more righteous or maybe godly idea or nature's idea of what's correct, that if you're intending to do a thing, that tells you everything you need to know. That tells you whether you should trust a source. Like we know the intent of the evening news. Once you grow up enough to understand what that intent is, now you know what the evening news is good for. But it takes so many people so long. But you see, when you get into a courtroom, your intent doesn't matter. Your intent is going to be crushed by procedure, by rules, by regulation, by tricks of language. And there's the perversion. And there's the dark side, and there's everything that goes against nature. Because if you go to nature, you could almost, maybe in a different way, assign an intent to everything. You plant the oak tree. The intent is that that will become an oak tree. And so everything that requires that seed to do what it needs to start to become an oak tree is the intent of whatever created it, or for even the seed itself. If you see the lion, what's the intent of the lion? The lion's going to kill a zebra because it needs to live. There's the intent of the lion. It's not hidden. It's not obscured. It's not crushed by procedure. It's not ignored. It is what it damn is on the Serengeti Plain. Everybody knows there's a hyena. Everybody knows there's a gazelle. The rules are on the table for all to see. But in these systems that we addressed in the last episode with you, it's almost like the law that is being implemented is designed to ignore what is called the spirit of law. How many times have you seen that court show where the lofty lawyer's up there and says, well, we're this, that, and the other thing, but we don't want to violate the spirit of the law. So basically what he's saying there is when this law was created, there was an intent. And if we violate the spirit of this law, then what it was intended to do is being misused. And yet the entirety of the law system now could give a damn about intent. What do you think?
Agree, 100%. Yeah, it's a really good point to bring up, actually. There's always, it's funny, though, because within any point, there's a lot of, you could go down any kind of path with the with following. So I'll give you a quick example. One is that, before we got on air, we spoke about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is essentially the precursor to the Bible, and that they themselves were, somewhat bastardized by the Vatican. So the laws are meant to be made from the Bible, but then the tune of the Bible has been changed on purpose to suit the story of the ruling power, which is essentially the Vatican. So we're not really dealing with natural nature or God law. We're really dealing with a man-made
perversion,
perversion of that. So there's a biblical passage that said, I can't remember who said it, but it's you can't serve two masters. You choose one or the other. you either choose God or, because we were never supposed to have government. When man created government, it was essentially saying that, you've chosen that master then, and you can't serve two masters. So we're no longer serving under God, we're serving man and man-made rules and regulations, which are not, they don't carry that divinity. So then everything that is in the court systems is essentially perverted from the get-go. The caveat to that is, I remember last chat I mentioned a couple of magistrates that I know of that tried to help the people along because they saw maybe good in them. And again, we're only dealing with people. We are dealing with the system and regulations, yes, of course. But at the end of the day, we're still dealing with people. And everybody, I think, can give numerous examples in their own life of, rules and regulations being bent or skirted or whatever because they had a connection with the man or the woman who was there to enforce or to enact those regulations. And, you've been cut some slack here or given a free this there instead of paying or whatever. It's always there. So we are still dealing on that level. We can still operate on that level of just completely cutting out all the rules, regulations, and man-made perversion of what is actual natural law, because we can always access that in another person. So whether or not that other person is completely devoid of their own spirituality, and then probably there's no chance of that connection, or maybe that's just because we are not developed enough to inspire that in another. Who knows what the answer is there. But at the same time, you think of somebody like Nelson Mandela or anyone who was incarcerated, and they never, you said earlier that the law isn't stacked in our favor like that. We could go into a courtroom, we don't know what we're talking about, and inadvertently end up in jail. But then, for most of us, that's not, that incites, frustration, anger, those feelings of being hard done by, and that is not fair. We think that is not a fair thing to happen. But what if that is actually a part of our evolution, personal evolution? And rather than fighting that, if we actually went into that experience fully of being incarcerated and to not harbor the anger and to come out the other side and to inspire millions of people because of who first of all, who we are in the first place, but also who we became as a result. And, there are people in history that have been wrongly incarcerated for a long time and come out and had a great effect on the world because they didn't fight what was going on. They didn't run from the experience that was being offered. And only to the ego is being in jail or being out in the free world different. Better or worse. It's just different. It's just a different experience. Only the ego will judge one as right and wrong, one as better or worse. But to to a higher power or a higher self, it's really just a different experience. And it's always how we choose to, I guess, how we choose to experience that experience. We can choose whether or not that's a heaven or hell on earth. And while I'm certainly in favor of giving everybody the opportunity to, I guess, choose a more favorable outcome for themselves and taking that personal power, I think it's important to not run from things. And this is when I deal with people who go through depression, for example, I offer to them to not run from the depression. And when you can not run from something and you turn to it and you embrace it and you say, okay, well, let's have this experience. Show me what you've got. Who am I going to become as a result? People are surprised at what can come out of that. And quite often it's extreme creativity or extreme potential for love and things that they never got before, because before they were fighting it. They were ruining that situation they were in. But if you turn to face it and you dive into it, doesn't necessarily make it unpainful, but it can have a far lesser effect. It doesn't rule you, it doesn't control you and grip you then. And it's almost like you're more free to play around in that space. And as a result, you just don't know what you're capable of in any situation. And especially when you're tested, that's when, the Bible and many spiritual texts talk about being tested, having 40 days and 40 nights and having, to be tested in many ways. And that is when you find yourself more than anything. You don't find it while you're surrounded by rainbows and lollipops and laying around in beanbags, floating around in a swimming pool. That's enjoyable and that's relaxing, but that's not where you find those deeper parts of yourself. It's always when you're tested. So yeah, anyway, the whole point of that whole thing was that there's always opportunity in every situation. And And I always think that we should be learning as much as we can about the world so that we can navigate it based on our true selves and our higher selves. However, if and when we end up in a situation that we may not see as favorable, if we can reframe the way we look at that, it can be something that propels us further than just what information and knowledge could have done in the first place had we avoided it. So I don't see that there's always a truly negative outcome for something, depending on how we ourselves are able to go into that and what we can make of it.
So there's a couple good points to be made, particularly with the observation you made dealing with depression. I've used this example to describe exactly that, and trying to find the right words that someone could think about it, but it mirrors this whole mask idea too. The difference between human beings and animals, in one way that's helpful to think about, is animals mostly live a reactionary lifestyle. The deer's in the field, he hears a branch break, he runs. He could be killed. Truly, he could be killed. So that's what he does. He hears a noise, he reacts. A human being doesn't have to live that way. A human being can be walking through the woods and hear the noise, and they can think, and they can plan, and they can do all these things, which is analogous to what's going on in our world now. And this is the animal paradigm being brought to bear. We said this thing, now you react and put this thing on your face. That's reacting all the time. And there's the non-adult paradigm being pulled down around you. But it also relates, you mentioned the serving of two masters. I went at that passage in the Bible so many times that I even recall that it's Matthew 6:20 something, 21, 22, in that neighborhood. And the reason I know it is because I wanted to get to the intent of that important idea. Is it true you can't serve two masters? And so what I did is I went at 3 or 4 versions. I think I took a Lomsa Bible, a Geneva Bible, a King James Bible, and an NIV Bible, the NIV being the least important of all those Bibles from my point of view because of what's done to the language. And what I realized is if I only had one of these, what I would draw from it is vastly different from the other one. But at the end of the day, I recognize that the lesson being taught here has merit. So how is it that this lesson that I can prove has merit is in this book? What does that tell me about the book? But you also mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I think very few people are aware of how that story went down when they were supposedly first discovered. You know who had wholesale control of them? A Catholic priest who was actually smoking cigarettes in the room where they were doing the fragments, by the way. You can look up pictures of it if you like. But they controlled wholesale inside Israel these supposed older versions of the Bible. Well, you can imagine, why would the Vatican be interested in possibly an older version of the thing they've been peddling all along, right? But look what's happened in the last 3 months. They're now introducing into the narrative that parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls have been forged. So you can't even trust that. And I think it backs up everything Tom just said. Got any ideas to throw in here, Jason?
Well, I've always been suspicious of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's for sure. I mean, come on, if the Vatican has control of something, what do you think is going to come out of it? I mean, come on. I mean, they even sat on it for, I forget for how many years. Wasn't it the 1990s when they finally released the bloody things in a book?
Well, it was on accident. The story goes that someone finally got sick of the Catholic Church hoarding all this information that should be open to everyone because it has to do supposedly with the Holy Bible, and they released it on the internet. So it's attributed that was one of the first big internet leaks.
Well, yeah, that it still had to come from out of the Vatican, though, which is, anyway, that's beside the point. I think everything we're talking about here, though, is about intent. Maybe we can kind of steer things that way while we got a little few minutes left here, Tom. How everything really comes down to the intent. And I say that to so many people pretty much every day at this point. Everything is about intent. What is the intent behind your words? What is the intent behind a number, behind a symbol? What's the intent behind being forced to wear a freaking mask everywhere you go? You know where I'm going there?
Yeah, well, that's a great point, because intent itself is the crux of being an adult or being a child, and being aware and being unaware, because you can only be fully realized and put into the world and create something that is fully realized if you understand and you know your intent. If you don't know the intent that you're putting into a conversation, or the intent that you're putting into a meal that you're making, or the intent that you're doing with your personal life, your work life, or anything, you're essentially not responsible. You're kind of living in that reactive space. So intent is it's like supremely important, because unless you are actually aware of your intent, first of all, how can you create the reality in the life that that is your calling, what the reason that you're here? And second of all, how can you ever really understand yourself or the world or those people around you? Because unless you are aware of that intent, then you can't be. And so intent itself comes down to awareness of the self, awareness of the energies around and within you. So I guess I've got nothing more to say on that, unless there's more of a directive from yourselves. But I just think that point you made is huge, because intent, I think, for me, is everything. It's the awareness.
Well, here's the thing with the whole transhumanist movement, how they want to get into machines and all that kind of thing. A machine can't have self-awareness, therefore it can have no intent. This is something that's always stuck in my mind. That's these people want to immortalize themselves, but a machine can't have intent. It can't have self-awareness. So what are they thinking here? The whole concept is broken. It's something that occurs to me over and over and over again. I mean, even with these stupid supercomputers, so you can crunch numbers faster. So what? That machine is still no more aware than my freaking toaster is.
It takes, isn't the main idea here that it takes directions, right? That's what a machine does. It gets directed, it gets steered. But take that to the other end of the spectrum, to the new life, the young life. I had this problem when I was young. I was called naive a lot when I was a young child. And the reason is because I didn't understand that people could purposely be acting like they're good, but really not be. I could not fathom when I was young. As I got older, I realized the idea behind that is, that person is naive. But really, what's really going on there? That's really about intent, is it? Because the pure young child, they don't even need intent, because their intent is pure for the most part. That's the innocence idea. In other words, they don't have beguilement and nasty ideas in them, you see. So by the time we get up to even having to label it intent, we've kind of crossed the Rubicon. I mean, you see where I'm going there, Tom?
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I 100% agree. That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, that goes down a long road. Actually, that would be a whole other episode, I think, to go down that path. But yeah, look, I think we are. I wonder if it's every kid though, because almost everybody that I speak to, like yourself, when you just said that described me as well. When I was a kid, I just knew. I had this inherent knowing that what was being offered to me was not right. I could see it in my parents, my teachers, my friends' parents, all saying certain things, but I could see through the words that they were saying to where those words were coming from. And that intent was off. It was just not, there was no congruency there whatsoever. And then as I got older into my teens and I, was eating a lot of junk food and doing a lot of other things, that kind of waned a little to the point where it just led to anger and rebellion. That's all I had. I didn't know the answers, and I still at that stage did not have the mental, emotional, or physical maturity to be able to stand up for myself. I was still, I guess, oppressed at that stage by that lack of awareness of intention from like you said, the innocence of a child innately has a true intention and a true intent, because that is the innocence. But the adults are perverted. Not all, but most. And again, I wonder if all kids have that feeling when they're young, because I've said that to other people and they just go, what are you talking about? So I just wonder if it's certain people that are born ready to be awoken at some point in their life, when they are ready to step into that, when they don't fear stepping into that, and when they have developed physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual maturity enough to then be able to step into that and to no longer be oppressed. I'm actually not sure. It's a good question to ask whether every single soul on earth has that ability, or if there are certain people that it's their path to not have that ability in this lifetime, and if they are a marker post for us to see and to also gauge ourselves based on others as well. Or is everybody meant to have that, but it's just a harder slog for others? They don't have those realizations as a young kid. As we had. And it's funny because everybody I have these conversations with, they say what you said. They say that. They say, as a kid, I knew, but it was only until later in life. It wasn't until into my adult life when I had reached these other milestones that I then was able to see clearly.
Well, what's unfortunate about this is I'm starting to realize as we're talking about it how critically important an idea this is to the young people now, because they're going to be far above some of them what we'll ever be in our lifetimes, just because everybody's lifting and so is consciousness. But as it goes now online, you got to say this isn't for children. It's all very unfortunate. But here's what happened to me. I knew what I was being told and expected to do was against every fiber of my body. And so the way I coped with it is I entered into lies, and that has a price. And what I ended up doing is say, well, I couldn't hear. So then this whole thing that my hearing had a problem became. And whenever people were saying, well, why didn't you do this thing? Or how come that didn't happen? The lie that I was proffering to protect myself because I knew it wasn't right, that I didn't want to do it, was I didn't hear it. And that put me down a road where there's prices to pay if you're going to use lies to try to insulate yourself. And so you've got to wonder, all these young people who are going to be lifting up mightily, doing things that their parents would never be able to do at a very young age, but they're going to face these situations where they're going to see parts of the world that just do not ring true, and yet they're being expected to interact and be part of it. It's a hell of a thing, but I don't know how you deal with it in the current climate. But why don't you tell people, Tom, real quick, where they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. I guess my email is probably the best. The email is info@globalbiodynamics with an S on the end, so globalbiodynamics.com. I'm happy to take emails and things. So yeah, I'll just offer one quick thing because I know we're running out of time, but that is that it is important for the young people to know it, but it's also important, I think, for adults to be educated in a way that they can fully support the kids that they have, because rather than thinking of kids as just yours and your property, in a legal sense, they are your property. But what most people don't realize, they always think that they're above their kids. Well, I know all this and I'm going to teach it to you, and this is how I did it and this is how you'll do it. But they don't realize that the kids that they have are there to actually teach them more about themselves than they are there to teach the kids about the world. Because quite often that's like one of those paradoxes that all you're doing is indoctrinating the kid for the most part. Even with best intentions, it's still, for the most part, unless you are a very aware human being yourself. So just understand, if you are an adult, that when you have kids come through, they come from something other than yourself. And they come into the world for a very definite reason. And part of that reason, whether you think you planned for them or not, there are no accidents, that they are there to teach you something about yourself and to honor that in the young child. And that, rather, then you're not oppressing that child's genius as they come through. You are actually allowing them to grow into that, and that in turn will create this better world that inherently I think we all want. And I think we get in our own way from allowing that to happen.
You know, part of the Western culture, we've lost so many traditions. And if I was going to be a parent in the modern day, I would always keep forefront in my mind, don't be dismissive of what a young child is telling you. There's all these examples of when children had kind of tapped in with their innocence, these higher ideals that probably no one else can bring to the world, even about what was going on right before they were born. Ideas like this, and the parents don't understand and they dismiss them, but that's really a whole other conversation. Jason, anything you want to get in before we wrap up and come back for hour two?
Well, we had Tom back again so quickly because we had a lot to talk about. So hopefully hour two is when we can really open up the can of interestingness, because as we've been experiencing once again, censorship is through the roof.
Well, there's another thing going on. A lot of parents are pulling their children out of school because of the beer bug regulations. It's a bit like a propaganda poster. Wayne just sent me stuff from his home state. It's almost hard to imagine that we're even in the United States reading this stuff about what's going to go on in schools. So adults tune in to listen to us, but there may be a lot of them homeschooling. So we should keep that in mind. Anyhow, that does bring the first hour of episode 239 to a close. Join us on the other side, where we maintain free speech at crow777radio.com. That's CRROW 777radio.com. That is the only Crow site in the entire world. Everything else is fraud, and they're up to bad things. So join us on the other side. Cheers.
enemy of knowing.